Hey, what's up guys? Brian from Zombie Guitar here. This is going to be part one of a three-part video series where I walk you through the entire process of writing a song from start to finish. So this songwriting process is something that anyone can replicate, anyone can do it. It's really not that difficult as long as you know a few fundamental concepts. And I've talked about these fundamental concepts in a few other videos before. One in particular is the How to Easily Learn Songs by Ear video. So if you've seen that video, this part one of the series is going to be very similar to that, only we're going to be writing our own song as opposed to learning someone else's song. So part one is going to be concepts. You can kind of follow along, use some of these concepts in your own songs, kind of pick and choose. You may not use everything that I talk about in this video, but I'm going to give you a lot of stuff here in part one. Part two is going to be more about structure. Part two, we're going to add the drums, add the bass, add other instruments, figure out what the chorus is, figure out what the verse is, figure out how to structure the song so that it's interesting and it doesn't sound like everything else on the radio. Basically just coming up with an interesting sounding song. And then part three is going to be the final production of the song. That's where I mix everything together. I'm going to make a music video to it. I'm actually going to take this song and add it to my new album that I'm coming out with, a new instrumental album. So part three is just going to be the final product. So you can kind of just we're just going to walk through the songwriting process together. All right, so the thing to realize is that most songs start from just a simple idea. And, as guitar players, we tend to have maybe hundreds of ideas per week, and we're just kind of noodling around, and we find stuff that sounds good. But most of the time, those ideas just kind of get tossed to the side, and we don't really do anything with them. Well, those ideas may very well be the next hit song if you were to actually do something with them and write a complete song out of it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take an idea that I had when I was like 12 years old. I was just starting guitar. I just remember this specific idea because it was kind of like the first song that I started to write by myself. I've wrote tons of songs. I've played in original bands and stuff like that for many years when I was younger, but I never kind of did anything with this particular idea. So this is going to be the idea that we're going to write this song with in this three-part series. So this idea came from the fact that I was learning bar chords at the time. I didn't know any note names. I didn't know anything really about theory. I just knew that I was learning some chords, and I was learning this bar chord shape at the time. So I learned this bar chord shape was movable. I could play that anywhere, here, 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 here. So it was like a movable shape. I understood that concept. And I kind of liked to play it here on the 5th fret just because that kind of fit my hand the best. If I played too far down here, my fingers would hurt pressing down the strings. If I played too far up here, my fingers kind of couldn't fit into the frets. Remember, I was only 12 years old at the time. This was all new to me. So I just kind of played with this shape here, and I just started noodling around and just listening to how the chords sound like this. Alright, so I like that sound. So, after playing around with that for a little bit, I started to kind of move some fingers around to maybe make something out of that. So I took my pinky and I put it here. That was a pretty easy thing to do. My pinky from there, put it here on the A string. So then I went like this. So right now I had this. Alright, cool. That sounded good. I didn't know why it sounded good, but it was a start. So then I ran with that idea a little more, and I started there, and then I wanted to move my pinky to here. I didn't really like the sound of that too much, so I figured maybe I'll move my 3rd finger to here. That sounded pretty good. I also realized that if I lift my middle finger up, I liked that sound also. So this was just experimentation here. So I got to this chord. Alright, something like that. And then I came up with a 4th chord by further moving my fingers around and just kind of experimenting with what sounded good, and I came up with this chord. Alright, so I had basically 4 chords essentially. I didn't know that they were 4 different chords. I didn't know that this was a chord progression. I was just kind of noodling around with something, and this is what I came up with when I was about 12 years old. All right, so that was what I came up with, and that sounded cool. But I didn't really know where to go with that. I didn't understand the rest of the fretboard. I didn't know anything about keys or music theory or anything like that. So I didn't really know what to do with that idea. So I just kind of noodled around with it whenever I picked up my guitar. I thought it sounded cool, but then I would move on to the next thing. I learned on to whatever Metallica song I happened to be learning at the time or whatever I was doing. That was just an idea that was tossed to the side. So this video, we're going to take that simple idea and we're going to run with it, applying some basic music theory concepts that are not very hard. Anyone can follow these concepts. I'm going to give those to you now. So there's three very fundamental concepts of music theory that are going to take you a very, very long way throughout your entire life as a musician. And these three concepts will allow you to take a very simple idea such as that one and basically turn it into a song. So those three things are: number one, you want to know how to determine the key of whatever you are playing. Number two, you want to know what the available chords are in whichever key that you're playing in. And then number three, you want to apply a number to each of the chords that are part of that key. And as we go through this lesson, you're going to see why all this stuff is very, very important. So in order to quickly determine the key of whatever your idea is, we're going to use what is known as the pentatonic box method. So I talk about the same method in that other video that I referenced you to, how to easily learn songs by ear. So the idea is you take this simple pentatonic scale pattern that looks and sounds like this. And realize that that pattern is movable and that can be played anywhere. So you can play it, I just played it on the 5th fret there, starting on the 5th fret. I could start maybe in the open position down here. I could start on the 1st fret. I could start on the 2nd fret. And I could basically play it anywhere between open and the 12th fret, which is when everything starts to repeat itself on the guitar. And I'm going to find one of the 12 possible pentatonic boxes between 0 and the 12th fret. One is going to fit perfectly with the idea. So it helps if you have some sort of looping device, if you have a looper pedal, or if you have a digital audio workstation on your computer that will allow you to loop your idea over. And then you're just going to kind of quickly figure out which of the 12 pentatonic boxes works the best. It's just going to lock in, and as soon as you hear it, you're going to say, yep, that's the one. As soon as you find it, then you know what your key is. So let me just demonstrate that real quick. Figure out the pentatonic box that works the best, then we'll know our key. Alright, so hopefully you were able to follow along with what I was doing there. I was just testing different pentatonic boxes between open and 12th fret to see which one fit perfectly. I didn't try them all because I wanted to save time for this video, but after trying a few different pentatonic boxes, I found that the one between the 10th and the 13th fret was the one that seemed to fit the best. That was this one. Alright, so what does that tell me? So once you find your pentatonic box, whatever on the low E string, whatever note your first finger falls on top of, that is the minor name for the key that you're in. So if you know your notes on the low E string, this would be very helpful. If you don't know them, I'll post a link to a lesson that teaches you about that stuff. Very, very, very basic stuff. So just knowing your notes on your low E string, I know that this note here, 10th fret, is the note D, and that's where my first finger falls. So that tells me that that's the minor name for this key. So this is the key of D minor. Also, where my pinky falls which was the 13th fret, that tells me the major name of the key. So the 13th fret is the note F. The 13th fret of the low E string is the note F. So this key could either be called D minor, or this key could be called F major. They are known as a relative major-minor pair. They share all the same stuff. They share all the same notes. They share all the same chords. They're a relative major-minor pair. So that is the first step. I now know the name of my key, D minor / F major. So once you know what your key is, you then want to turn to your circle of fifths, and that is going to give you the information about which chords are part of that particular key signature. So that's another name for it, key signature. Rather than just calling it key, you could call it a key signature, and I'll explain why in a minute. So if you look at your circle of fifths, you go and you find your F on the outer circle, and then you'll see on the inner circle there is a D minor. Well, that's right there telling you that those two are related in some way. F is the major name for the key signature. D minor is the minor name for the key signature. So locating that on the circle of fifths, you can then look at the surrounding 6 chords in this grouping of 6, and that will tell you the 3 major and 3 minor chords that are part of the key that you're working in. So within the key of F major / D minor, you have these 6 available chords to work with. Those are all diatonic chords, they're called. So those are the 6 diatonic chords that are part of this particular key signature. I just want to make one point here before someone yells at me. Every time I make a video about this topic, someone always comes out and say, hey, why didn't you talk about the other chord that's part of that key? So as I said, you have your 3 major chords and your 3 minor chords that are found in this key. But no matter what key signature you're working in, any of the 12 possible key signatures, there's actually 7 total chords. So there's 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and then there's an additional chord that's known as a diminished chord. But we're not going to talk about that in this video. We're not going to be using any diminished chords. If you want to learn more about diminished chords, I'll also post a lesson to that below. I'll also post another lesson called the 7 diatonic chords found in any key and how they are derived. But that's a little bit beyond the scope of this video. You don't need it. All you need to know is, number 1, the key signature, number 2, the 3 major chords and the 3 minor chords that are part of the key that you're working in. So now the third fundamental theory is going to be to apply a number 1 through 6 to each of these 6 chords of this key signature. So on your outer circle, middle, that's always going to be your 1 chord. And then to counterclockwise of that, that's going to be your 4 chord. Clockwise of that, that's going to be your 5 chord. So 1, 4, 5 is going to be your outer circle. And then you have 2, 3, and 6 on your inner circle. So 6 is right in the center. 2 is to the counterclockwise direction, and then 3 is to the clockwise direction. So 1, 4, 5 on the outside, 2, 3, 6 on the inside. If you can't remember this, maybe write this down somewhere. This is going to help you immensely. So you give these Roman numerals. So major chords get capital Roman numerals, minor chords get lowercase Roman numerals. So here's your 1 chord, here's your 2 chord, here's your 3 chord, here's your 4 chord, here's your 5 chord, here's your 6 chord. Major gets uppercase, minor gets lowercase. So there's just one more thing that I want to talk about before moving on, and that is something that people occasionally like to correct me on, and they're actually not wrong, but I'm actually not wrong either, and I'll explain why. So that is if you are referring to a particular key signature by its minor name as opposed to its major name. So in this key signature, which could be either called F major or D minor, if you want to refer to this as its minor name, then some people will say, well, you should be calling the D minor chord the 1 chord. Well, if you do that, then you have to rearrange the numbers of all the rest of the chords. So the F major chord is no longer the 1 chord. And, if you're taking the F major and you're applying a new number to that, you're then going to have to rearrange everything, ultimately resulting in 2 different numbering systems for major keys and minor keys. So that's just unnecessary confusion if you ask me. It's much easier just to simply think, okay, there's 12 possible key signatures to choose from. Once you find your key signature, there's 6 possible chords, 3 of which are major, 3 of which are minor, and then you just apply a number 1 through 6 to each of those 6 chords, and then as you're writing your song, you can jump back and forth between the major version of the key and the minor version of the key, which we're going to be doing coming up, and just keep the numbering system consistent. All right, so that's just my view on that particular subject. But if you want to renumber everything based on the fact that it's a minor key, go for it. It does not make a difference. It's only on paper. It does not change what the audience is going to hear in your song. They're not going to be thinking that should be a 1 chord or that should be a flat 3 chord or whatever. They're just going to be hearing stuff. So find your key, find your available chords, give each of the available chords a number from 1 through 6, and let's move on. Alright, so back to the original idea. We found that this was in the key of D minor / F major. So if I was to apply a chord progression to this thing that I played, the chord progression out of these 6 possible chords that seems to work the best is a D minor chord to an F major chord to a C major chord to a B flat major chord. Alright, so I'm just playing this 4-chord chord progression on various different spots of the fretboard. It doesn't matter. I now have a roadmap. So I know that it's D minor, F major, C major, B flat major. Those are all chords that are part of this key. Those chord shapes can be found all up and down the fretboard in various different shapes. You determine those shapes by using what is known as the caged system. I'll post a link to my lesson on the caged system below too if you want to dive more into that topic. But the idea here is we're just going to call that a 6-1-5-4 progression. All right, so even though I'm starting with the D minor chord, and you could technically say this is in the key of D minor, I'm still referring to that as the 6th chord. And then we're moving to the 1 chord, and then we're moving to the 5 chord, and then we're moving to the 4 chord. All right, so now we're starting to get somewhere. So we have the intro to the song, which is the thing that I started out with, the original idea. We then came up with a chord progression that fit over that idea, and we determined that it was a 6-1-5-4 chord progression in this particular key signature. So let's say we want to add another part to the song, and we want to keep the other part in the same key. So we can look to our 6 available chords, and we can just kind of play stuff in any random order until we find something that we like. So let's say that for the next part of the song, I want to jump to the F major chord, and I want to play, let's say I want to do a 1-5-2-4 progression. So in this key signature, 1 is F major, 5 is C major, 2 is G minor, and then 4 would be B flat major. So let's say part 1 is this. All right, so that's part 1. Part 2 is going to be still part of the same key. I'm just kind of playing different chords within that key in a slightly different order. So part 1 of the song is a 6-1-5-4 progression. Part 2 of the song is a 1-5-2-4 progression, all based on the position that the chords are in the circle of fifths and the numbers that we applied to them. All right, so now we have 2 potential parts to the song. The first part was a little bit sadder, a little bit darker sounding. The second part is a little brighter, a little happier sounding, okay? So, if I was to just play part 1 by itself and not play part 2 at all, you could arguably say that that was D minor, the key was D minor. If I was to play part 2 by itself and nothing else, you could arguably say that was the key of F major. But this is an entire song we're putting together here. The song is in a key signature. So I am not giving it a label of minor. I'm not giving it a label of major. I'm just saying this is the key signature of D minor / F major. And depending on where the song takes me, some parts may sound a little happier. Some parts may sound a little sadder. But it's still the same key signature. I'm still just using the same 6 chords. Right, so that was the melody that I came up with for both parts. So why did that sound good? So the reason that sounded good is because everything that I was playing was in key. So when someone says it's in key, what they're really saying is that you're sticking to only the 7 unique notes that are found in the key signature that you're playing in. So we had already determined that this is the key of F major / D minor. And in that particular one of the 12 key signatures, you have a unique set of 7 notes that are going to be part of that key. Those 7 notes are F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E. If you want to refer to this by its minor name and you want to call this the key of D minor, you would simply just start on the note D, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, and C. It's still the same 7 notes. I just started on the note D if you want to call it the D minor scale, or I started on the note F if you want to call it the F major scale. It's the same 7 notes, same 7 or the same available chords to use for the the chord writing of the song. It's all one and the same thing, and it's just this key signature. So those 7 notes sound good because they're all part of this key. Now, usually the melody line is sung by a vocalist, but it doesn't matter. I'm not a vocalist. I write my melody lines on the guitar. You could write melody lines on the piano. You could write melody lines on the saxophone. It doesn't really matter. It's just usually done by a vocalist because people like to hear people sing. But a good vocalist will be hitting the correct notes, and the correct notes are notes that are in key. All right, so that's the first layer. The second layer is which specific notes of the key scale to use, and those are going to be what are known as chord tones. So as I was playing that melody, that demo of the melody, I was lighting up the chord tones of the underlying chords. So the first chord would be a D minor chord, which consists of the notes D, F, and A. D, F, and A are all part of the 7 available notes in this key signature, but those are going to be the best sounding notes to land on as the chord change occurs to the D minor chord. Once the chord moves to an F major chord, that consists of the notes F, A, and C, all of which are part of this key signature set of notes, but those 3 notes, the F, A, and C, are going to be the best sounding notes to land on when it moves to the F major chord. When it then moves to the C major chord, which consists of the notes C, E, and G, those are going to be the best notes to land on. When it then moves to the B flat major chord, which consists of the notes B flat, D, and F, those are going to be the best notes to land on for that chord. All right, so I did everything right here in this little area here because that's just the pentatonic box that we used to determine our key earlier in this video. But I'm free to do this anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar. Those 7 individual notes, F, G, A, B flat, C, D, and E, are found all up and down the neck of the guitar. So as long as I'm only hitting those notes, everything's going to be in key. And then when the chord changes are occurring, I am selecting the correct notes of the chord within that available framework of notes because those are going to be the best sounding notes for that particular chord. So I have a ton of lessons on this stuff. I have a guitar site called zombieguitar.com. I teach all that stuff. That's what soloing is all about. That's what melodic soloing is about. But just keep in mind that that's what a vocalist is doing. A good vocalist is singing in key using the unique set of 7 notes in the key signature they're in. And then they're also landing on chord tones as the chord changes are occurring because those are the best sounding notes on a per chord basis within that key. So hopefully this is making sense. So I just did that on the guitar. I did that right here, but as we progress through the song, I will be using the rest of the guitar. I just want you to understand the theory behind it. All right, so I just want to talk about 2 more things, and that is adding interest to a song. And, if you play everything that's 100% in key, that's all well and good. It sounds good, everything works, but sometimes you might kind of want to throw a curveball to the listener. So, the whole idea between when you play out of key stuff or key changes or things like that, it's really just to kind of, the listener's into the groove of the song, they're listening, it sounds good, but then you throw in like a curveball and they say, "Ooh, I wasn't expecting that," and it catches their attention. All right, so those are the kind of things that separate, a cookie cutter run-of-the-mill song that sounds like everything else from a really good song. So 2 ideas on how to do that are, number 1, using borrowed chords, and number 2, doing key changes. So we're going to talk about both of those things, and that's going to wrap it up for this video. So let's first talk about borrowed chords. So, you have your key signature, F major / D minor. You have your 6 available chords grouped together on the circle of fifths, like so. If I want to look to, the parallel keys, that's where you borrow chords from. If I'm calling this the key of F major, I want to look to the key of F minor to borrow chords from. So the parallel key of F major would be the key of F minor. So I have these 6 available chords to borrow from. Or if I'm calling the original key signature the key of D minor, I may want to look to the parallel key of D major. I can also borrow chords from that key. So when you're borrowing chords, you don't really want to go overboard with it. You don't want to do too much of it, because then the song's going to sound jumbled. It's not going to make sense. It's going to be all over the place. The listener isn't really going to have a sense of home. But if you're writing a song and everything is kind of in key, and the song is going on and on and on, but then you throw a borrowed chord in there, that's going to catch their interest again. They're going to be like, oh, this is a good song. All right, I forgot I was listening to this song, but let me listen to this some more. That's the idea behind borrowed chords and other things to spice up your songs. So let me just give you 2 examples of common borrowed chords. The first one is going to be, I'm going to borrow the B flat minor chord from the key signature of F minor. So down in this grouping of 6 right here, you see the B flat minor chord. I'm going to borrow that chord, and I'm going to throw that into my original progression, the part 1 progression. So part 1's progression was a 6-1-5-4 progression, like this. If I didn't want to play it in bar chords, I could play it down here in open chord shapes. Doesn't make a difference. So I'll just play it down there, just for the sake of examples. So that sounded okay, but I didn't really like ending on the D minor chord there. I could have, I still successfully borrowed a chord, but I think I'd rather end this particular thing on a F major chord. So let me try that. That sounded a little better. So I was able to get that B flat major chord followed by a B flat minor chord, and then it kind of worked. So it resolved on the F major chord. It ended on the F major chord. That seemed to sound better to me. And that B flat minor chord, it was an out of key chord, but it worked. And that was a borrowed chord from the parallel key of F minor. So now let's try to borrow a chord from the other direction. So let's borrow a chord from the key signature of D major. So the chord I'm going to go with is going to be the A major chord. In our original key, the A is supposed to be a minor chord if you want to remain 100% diatonic or 100% in key to our original key signature. But I'm going to borrow the A major chord from this other key, and I'm going to throw that in there every once in a while. So let's see how that sounds. So that sounded pretty good. I was doing my 6-1-5-4 progression to start out, but then, the second time around, instead of going D minor, F major to the C, I went D minor, F major to an A major chord. That A major chord was pulled from the parallel key of D major, but it seemed to fit within this key. But if I only use that A minor chord very sporadically throughout the song, that could be one of the tricks that I use just to kind of add interest to the song, just to keep everything from not sounding so redundant. So let me try also using that A major chord for the part 2 of the song. So remember, we wrote our part 1, which was the 6-1-5-4 progression. We then came up with this part 2 of the song, which is So So that was the 1, 5, 2, 4 progression part of the song. That was part 2. So let me see if I can fit an A major chord in there somewhere. So. So I don't really like that too much. Let me try. Let me try something else. Let me try. All right, so I like that the best. I did the F major to the C major to the A major to the B flat major. All right, so I could have kept all that right here too. So I kind of like putting the A major chord there. So again, that's part of the songwriting process. You know, it's not always going to sound good. Just because you want to throw a borrowed chord into the mix does not necessarily mean that it's going to sound what you want it to sound like. It's just an option. So you want to try and fit these things in to kind of have it make sense to the song idea that you have going on in your head. So I kind of felt that the A major chord fit best when played right before the B flat major. So that's how I was able to fit that borrowed chord into that part of the progression. So that's borrowed chords. So play around with that kind of stuff, add interest to your in-key diatonic chord progressions, and see what you come up with. So the last thing I want to talk about in this video is key changes. So that's another way to add interest to the song, shock the listeners, throw some unexpected curveballs at them. So basically, this is really where knowing your numbering or applying numbers to each of the diatonic chords comes in handy. So let's just take the original chord progression, the 6, 1, 5, 4 chord progression in our original key, and let's change it to a key that is one whole step higher. So the original chord progression, 6, 1, 5, 4, D minor, F major, C major, B flat major, one whole step higher than our starting chord, which was D minor, which is rooted here on the 5th fret, would be here on the 7th fret. So if we want to have our first chord be this chord, which is now an E minor chord, and then I want to play a 6, 1, 5, 4 progression in the key of E minor, it's going to sound like this. Playing the exact same thing, and it was pretty obvious when I was playing bar chords, but let's say that I wanted to do all this in the open position here. That may not be quite as obvious, but knowing what we talked about in this video, having your circle of fifths handy, you can kind of see how all this fits together. So let's play this 6, 1, 5, 4 chord progression starting out in D minor, and then we'll shift the key to this other key, the key of E minor, otherwise known as the key of G major, the major and minor name for it. So let's play them both back to back. So you see how they both sounded the same type of progression. It was just two different keys. I started out in the key signature of D minor / F major. I then shifted the key to the key signature of E minor / G major. Why did I choose that key? Well, that was just a key that was one whole step higher than the original key. Moving from the D minor chord being our first chord, moving up one whole step or 2 frets to the E minor chord. That was a one whole step key change, but I could have tried changing it to other keys, just play around with it. That's the whole process of songwriting. That's just common key change to do, is to shift the key up one whole step higher. So there's a bunch of songs that use that in it. I'm sure you have heard that specific key change before. Anyway, so this video is getting kind of long. We're going to kind of end this here. Stay tuned for part 2. Part 2, we're going to talk about structuring the song, coming up with all the different parts, adding drums, adding bass, adding lead guitar parts and stuff like that. Basically just taking all these ideas and putting them together into a final product. So that's going to be part 2. That'll be coming out in about a week after the release of this video. So stay tuned for that. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask. I'll see you next time.